for coming today. Thank you, Dr. Rania, for being here today as well. I'll be giving a short introduction of our speaker. Dr. Rania Awaad is a practicing psychiatrist based in Stanford University School of Medicine and the director of Muslims and Mental Health Lab. She pursued her psychiatric residency training at Stanford, where she also completed a postdoctoral clinical research fellowship with the National Research Institute of Mental Health. Her research and clinical work are focused on the mental health needs of Muslims. In this capacity, she is also the clinical director of the Bay Area branch of the Khalil Center, a spiritual wellness center pioneering the application of traditional Islamic spiritual healing methods to modern clinical psychology. She has been the recipient of several awards and grants for her work. Before studying medicine, she had pursued classical Islamic studies in Damascus, Syria, and holds certification in Quran, Islamic law, and other branches of the Islamic sciences. Dr. Awaad is also a professor of Islamic law at Zaytuna College, which is an American Muslim liberal arts college in Berkeley, CA. In addition, she serves as a director of the Rahma Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating Muslim women and girls. Dr. Awaad is a nationally recognized speaker, award-winning teacher, researcher, and author in both the Islamic and psychiatric sciences. The Muslim and Mental Health Lab is Dr. Awaad's brainchild. She's passionate about providing accurate, balanced, culturally and religiously congruent information about mental health to Muslims and about Muslims to the field of mental health. So you can get started if you want.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. It's wonderful to be here with you. Kind of a neat program, mashallah. I'm excited to get to know a little bit more about what everyone's doing with HalalHacks, alhamdulillah. And also kind of looking forward to this discussion. I hope kind of depending on our numbers and how many we are all together, hopefully there'll be time for conversation as well. I'm going to go ahead and share a screen with you. And I'm going to say that kind of at the very beginning of this conversation that, I'm really here to talk about this concept of social media and mental health and what does that mean exactly? Because there's some really great aspects that are coming through, of course, with mental health, but then there's in terms of social media, but then there's also, things that we're concerned about, to be honest with you. And I think that's where that intersection exactly is where we're going to have a conversation today, and we'll get started. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ajma'in. So as I said at the very beginning here, I want to make sure that we're clear that there's, I'll definitely be mentioning some of the positives, but also some of the negatives that come with this discussion on, social media and what it's really doing to our mental health in a good sense and in a negative sense. And I'm sure all of you guys have a sense of this, but it's about creating healthy relationships with technology. And for those of you who are in the tech field, hoping to go into the tech field, right, there's amazing things that could come out of, this conversation about how technology's completely and totally changed our lives and will continue to. I consider it to be the kind of thing where once it's created, you're not going to make it go back. So how do you harness it properly, right? So that it doesn't negatively affect our mental health. And I think about it like driving cars. Once created, you're not going to make them go back. You're not going to tell people don't learn how to drive. That could be very dangerous, right? You're going to teach people how to drive properly so that then they can actually get to better destinations and where they need to go safely. And I think that's kind of the same thinking in my processing of this matter. So moderation is very much something that is a key in Islam. It is really one of the trademarks of Islam, right? Moderation in all things, balance in all things, not having extremes in either way. And part of that moderation is also, we look down upon Islam, and he looks down upon this concept of overindulgence. And as you know, for those of you on various social media platforms, I am too, I'm with you with that, okay, is the concept of you could just lose yourself completely and totally in this world of social media. And in that can become an overindulgence, even an overdependence, right? Which we'll talk about shortly and how that actually affects ourselves and our way of thinking. And that overexposure, so all those words with the word over ahead of time, right? Overconsumption, overexposure, overindulgence, all of that could sort of happen. And the things that are not in moderation is where we worry about leading to an unhealthy patterns of thinking and being, right? So what is the exact effect? What does the research say? What have folks, what have we found out about all of this? That just as it could be a beneficial tool, it could also be negative, because you know this and I know this, that what people post, especially if they're doing like personal posts on social media, there's very few of those on my account. It's just not the way, my account or the lab account operates. But for many people, they'll use their Instagram account, for example, for their, kind of their own social, right, kind of showcasing of themselves and highlights of themselves. And those are typically positive. Right? You're not going to put the picture of you like half asleep as a post. I mean, maybe some people, but not most, right? It's usually smiles. It's usually happy things. It's usually things to celebrate. It's usually just seemingly great. And if you're perusing through your feed, you're going to eventually get the sense that like everybody else out there is happy except you. And everybody else has got it made except you. And everybody else has their life perfect except you. And everybody else, whatever you feel deficient about yourself, if you scroll through your feed, right, you're going to even like somebody else might be scrolling through the exact same things and following the exact same people and may not get the same result as you because it feeds on your deficiency. So let's take the example of somebody who might be looking to get married. They're looking for a spouse. They're looking for a partner in life, right? A soulmate. And as they scroll through and they see all these happy couples, right? Because the reality is it's a smile on the social media, but behind closed doors, God knows what's actually happening, right? But the reality is what you see is smiles, and you see everybody that seems really fulfilled when they found their, happy, they found themselves and they found their partner in life, right? And it feeds on you because you're looking for that and you don't have it yet. Whereas the next person over, where that's not really their frame of thinking, that's not something they're looking for, they just scroll right past that and it's not really affecting them. Right. So that's something to keep in mind too, that when you see all the highlights, they're typically positive. And unfortunately, they also feed on any sense of, deficiency or lack of, a lack that you might have in your own life. So just get a sense of that as well. Kind of take a big grain, take that, take that with a big heap, if you will. I was going to say grain of salt, but actually take it with like a heap of salt, right? Whenever you see the pictures, and realize that your own insecurities or your own deficiencies are really played up in that whole process. And if you don't have that frame of thinking going in, as you kind of aimlessly sometimes, and I do this too, there's times where I honestly, like you're there, you're posting something, you're doing something. And then as you know, like it just sort of like keeps, so you're just like scrolling. We all do this, right? And then I literally have to say, well, what am I doing? Like, what a waste of time. What am I doing? Right. And like literally put it aside and go do something else. And that's just real. I'm just being real with you, just being vulnerable and kind of real with you. It's the reality of, and if you don't self-control that over the first slide where we talked about like, making sure you don't overindulge in it, right? And then everything in moderation, and you literally have a stop button for yourself, it'll be hours. You will literally lose hours upon hours upon hours, right? And that's what I'm worried about, essentially. So what does it lead to? Stick expectations, right? It can really affect our expectations in life. In counseling, since I spend so much of my hours of my day working with people, right? Their real life issues and problems and concerns. And it could be, things happening in their own life, or things that are in their marriage, or things in their academic work, whatever it may be. A lot of people have unrealistic expectations of what that should look like. So why? Many times it could be like a cultural thing or a family thing. There's expectations family puts on you or culture puts on you, but then there's also comparisons. People compare each other to their peers all the time. We do it like without even realizing. And then what's considered to be real or normal or good has a lot to do with how you see what your peers are doing, right? That's kind of the bar or the expectation, not bars where you drink, but bars on like the bar that you're trying to reach, right? And so it has to do with what your peers have done or not done. And as you look at that, you realize, oh, that's what a happy couple is supposed to be. No, actually, a couple is more like what your parents have going on. Okay. Like that's a little more realistic, right? There's happy days, there's bad days, there's good days, there's sad days, right? And I'm over generalizing. Everybody's parents are different, but that's a little more realistic than whatever you're seeing online. And I could reassure you that with like certainty. Do you see what I'm saying? And I think that's important. So people come into relationships with totally skewed expectations of what it's really like, you know? Or let's talk about like academic, kind of work, and you kind of shoot for like the stars, right? And you see what your peers are doing, but then you go through your feed and again, it's happy things, it's positive things, it's celebratory things, but you don't see every rejection that came in and every denial letter that came in and every, job opportunity that was lost and every, you don't see those things because those are not posted about. But that's reality too, right? Because for every success, there's probably like 5 failures or more behind it, but you don't necessarily see that on your feed, right? So it messes with your head. It kind of does skew the way we think. And because we don't share the same life experiences exactly, it almost feels when you go onto your feed, you kind of just sense like, maybe I'm inferior. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm not worthy enough. Maybe I'm not smart enough, right? So we start having this very negative cycle of self-talk when we see other people seemingly doing okay, but we don't see how many failures it took to finally have that one success. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's part of the conversation here about like altered perception of reality. I feel like I'm having this conversation all the time in therapy with folks, like what's real and what's perception, what's your perception, right? What's reality and what's perception? And part of that, this is where the mental health discussion comes in, because if you live too much in that alternate reality, right, skewed reality, it hurts. It actually does have a direct negative impact on your mental health. And so you start becoming somebody that has less self-confidence, and you become somebody who is very much kind of have this inner critic. We all have an inner critic. We all have that little voice in our head that like kind of bothers us all the time, right? And tells us things. But then honestly, it gets louder and louder and louder. And some people have a really hard time even shutting it off all day long. Like it's bothering them all the time. And that's where this effect on negative effect on mental health starts to happen, right? So look, I'm not trying to say social media is this big bad thing, get off of it right now, right? Because I'm not going to tell you something that I myself am not doing, right? I'm going to tell you something that I myself am doing. What I am doing is I am on social media too, but it's definitely in moderation to the best of my ability. And it's the kind of thing where if I do find myself aimlessly scrolling, there is definitely that like, nope, stop, done, right? And the reason for that, it's not, I mean, there's so many interesting things. And yes, you feel like you're learning and you feel like this little light bulb goes off. You're like, oh, that's cool. What a cool idea. What a cool post. What a cool this, but then you have to really guard yourself from all the other posts that you're seeing that kind of feed on any insecurities you have inside of yourself, right? So here's a couple slides where we talk specifically about, well, what are those things? What are the exact issues that I'm talking about here? So take a look at this with me. On one hand, you have self-esteem, right? So remember I said about this kind of skewed sense of reality. So by displaying only the positive moments and experiences on social media, like on these various feeds that you guys are on, or platforms rather, what you also find is that you start to downplay your own good and positive qualities or attributes. Somehow they seem more inferior to what's there that everyone else seems to be doing. And I get people saying this all the time. Everybody else is happy, or everybody else's relationship is better than mine, right? Everybody seems to be getting into their, program or job of choice. And I'm like, are we sure about that? Like, so we have to have these real conversations, like deep conversations sometimes in therapy. And some people are just like, no, really, like everybody. And I'm like, show me. Right. And so they'll open up the feed and kind of go through, and it's like, well, look at this person and this person and this person. And we have to remember what's shown there is a very, very, very small percentage of the reality of that person's life. Right. So that's just, keep that in mind. Then there's the thing called jealousy that nobody wants to admit that they have. Right. Like self-esteem, people are willing to be like, yeah, I think I need to work on my self-esteem. You talk about jealousy. Oh, no, I'm not a jealous person. No. I only want the best for everyone else, right? That's how people immediately will say. But the reality of it is we're human, and jealousy is a natural human emotion that Allah has created and has given us and has warned us about as well. And it's, and too much of that, right, is definitely problematic. A little bit of it is kind of natural human, and you still have to kind of work against it. It's one of the characteristics and traits that are what? One of the diseases of the heart. Yeah, right. Like we have to actually work against it and protect our hearts from it for those of us who are on a spiritual kind of path, inshallah. And so how do you end up there? Because sometimes it's like very small. Some people are like jealous, and they've always been, even as a little tiny kid, right? Like some people just have it as a natural disposition and they have to really work against it. For everybody else, they have a little bit of jealousy that just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. And if you are honest with yourself and you think back, you know for a fact that you've had a friend or a person in your life that you've been jealous about, right? Like you know for a fact, like think back to your grade school, it could be just whatever they had that you didn't have, whatever they were wearing that you weren't wearing, whatever friends they had that you didn't, and so on and so forth. SubhanAllah. But as we get older and become adults, as we go into our kind of adult lives, this happens as well. And you have to really be careful about this, like bombarding yourself essentially with kind of these very negative emotions and feelings towards others who have what seems to be more than you or better than you, right? So those two qualities are, qualities that we definitely suffer from, if you will, in the whole like social media world. And that combination, the combination of jealousy and that unrealistic expectations that I was talking about earlier, can lead to something that's very problematic. And that's the lack of gratitude. Because as Muslims, we are meant to be people who are constantly giving shukr or being thankful. Shukr is gratitude, right? And we're told that if we thank Allah, like we show gratitude, He'll actually give us more. In the Quran, it says, وَلَئِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ, right? That if you thank me, I will increase you, right? I'll increase you, and all that's good. And so it's an interesting thing because what should be happening is a person says, oh, look at this person, they got married. Oh, look at this person, they got into that MBA program. Look at this person, they got into med school. Look at that person, they just graduated from whatever. Like they see all these positive things, right? And so it should be like, shukr, 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 right? Gratitude, 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 gratitude. But unfortunately, that jealousy thing that happens that we talked about before, sometimes it just gets into our hearts and it's kind of like, oh man, I couldn't get into that, whatever, fellowship, right? Oh man, I didn't, so it ends up messing with your head. And so unfortunately, because that jealousy comes in and kind of creeps up into there, you end up finding yourself not being fully able to give shukr, right, for what that person got, and being careful not to be jealous of it. And then asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for good for yourself, whatever it may be. So you have to really think about that comparison that we do and how it prevents us. It literally prevents us from appreciating what we do have in our lives, because you're always, keeping up with the Joneses, right? You're always looking at the grass seemingly greener at the other side, right? Like it just seems that way. And sometimes in therapy, I'll literally have somebody say, okay, in your mind, walk over to the other side. Literally, like walk over to the other side and tell me, is it green? And so we literally go through and kind of like realistically think about that person's life and what's happening. And eventually a person's able to correct their reality, correct their perception and get back to reality, and go like, yeah, actually they have these great things that are going for them, but they also have these like 5 things over here that would be really, really hard for me to, it's like, well, see, everybody's got their thing, you know what I mean? They're good and their pros and their cons. So anyhow, somehow going back to this, kind of showing appreciation or shukr or gratitude when you do see something that is positive in someone else's life actually does something really beautiful in Islam. You basically protect yourself from the jealousy. You are essentially making a dua or a prayer for that person without them even knowing, right? And we know that that's one of the most powerful duas in the world, when you make dua for somebody behind their back without them even knowing you're making that kind of dua for them. So let's say you see a picture of somebody that just, got engaged, right? Or somebody just had a baby or whatever, some positive thing, right? And you kind of go, oh, wow, mashallah, like that's really great. May Allah make them happy, right? Just something, you some small prayer in your head or in your heart. And at that point, because you said that dua, the angels say Ameen with you. And that dua is so powerful that inshallah they do get the blessing of that dua that you just said. And so do you. And so do you. Right? It is so powerful and it's so different than somebody seeing something and go, I didn't get that, they did, right? SubhanAllah, right? Which is then jealousy creeps up, all the negative self-talk creeps up. You see how they're so drastically different, but you have to like work against the easier thing. And the easier thing is to be jealous. And the easier thing is to compare. And the easier thing is to say, oh, I must not be smart enough or as good as fill in the blank, right? So, trying our best not to frame everything negatively actually is work. And this is why we say therapy is work. Like it literally takes work to kind of really kind of change the way you're looking at things around you. And if you're constantly in that very negative space, it will lead to negative mental health. Like you will have poor mental health because of it. So, just keep in mind all these different pieces. There's one more piece that I want to add to this story. And so just to recap, we talked about jealousy, we talked about self-worth, or kind of like, kind of your sense of self-worth. And then we talked about gratitude. Now I want to talk about the sense of conflicted sense of self, or the fancy term for this is cognitive dissonance, which some of you may be familiar with that term. It's a great term. It's actually something that happens all the time with social media, all the time. Why? Because you're looking at something and it seems like these folks are happy, smiles, happy, everything's great. They look beautiful, they look polished, right? And you all know, like, I don't know how many of those like makeup tutorial videos are with TikToks. I mean, it's just like after a while, you're just like, please, good God. Like, it's just so much, and it's like, and you'll see that, especially the ones where like, whatever. And some of them like overdo looking kind of ridiculous. And then like, look just marvelous afterwards. But even for like the regular person, right? You all know, and I know, right? That like, you don't look totally airbrushed like that unless you've spent a bazillion hours trying to look like that, right? And so, but that's what shows up on the screen. And that's what I'm saying too, like even people in their own relationships, they're kind of like, why don't you look like that all day long? And it's like, because I have a real life and a real job, and I have kids and I have a reality, and I have, and it's just like they totally skewed thinking of what is beauty and what is, anyway, that's a whole other discussion, mashallah. But back to this cognitive dissonance, right? Literally, as you're scrolling through, even if you're somebody who's like with it, like you're hearing this talk, you're listening to this, and you're like, yeah, that makes sense, totally makes sense, yeah, absolutely. But as you're scrolling through, right, what you're looking at seems normal, but it's not. It's some of the most abnormal stuff you'll ever see. And I don't mean the silly TikTok stuff, I mean like the actual, like even the happy smiles and what perfectly manicured and perfectly pictured and perfect this and perfect that, and even if it's not you, even if it's like somebody baked something, the way they position the angle and they put the whatever and they put the, I mean, you would think that they're like a master chef. The reality is it probably took them all like 6-7 hours finally putting that meal together and finally positioning the camera properly to make it look exactly that for that one photo. You know that, I know that. Like if we're going to talk real with each other, you would agree with me, I think, I hope, inshallah. Because you probably have taken that many hours to do a perfect post too, okay? Inshallah, we're going to be real with each other. But as you're scrolling through, you're not saying to yourself, yeah, that took 7 hours. Yeah, that's not real. Yeah, that's 8 hours. Yeah, that's just manicured. Yeah, that's filtered. Yeah, that's whatever. You're not necessarily being that critical. So what you are seeing is just coming on in. It's coming on in. It's coming on in. It's coming on in. And eventually what happens is this thing called cognitive dissonance. What is that? It's essentially having a completely conflicting thought and attitude. Your thoughts could actually be like, this is not real. This is not reality, right? But your attitude about it is like, oh, that's really beautiful. Oh, that's really great. Oh, I want that too. And they're not matching each other. They're literally not matching each other. So this is where you're constantly exposed to something, but you have actually opposing beliefs or thoughts to it. But eventually they just don't match, right? They just don't mesh. And so this is where cognitive dissonance in our field actually leads to various degrees of psychological distress. Like it actually does have, when you talk with folks, this whole concept of reality and perception, it's like you can talk straight, but then as you really, really start to dig down, you realize that people have quite a bit of cognitive dissonance. They're pretty conflicted about what they really believe about beauty, what they really believe about wealth, what they really believe about happiness, right? It's not exactly matching the words coming out of their mouth. nor are their behaviors. Because if their behaviors really matched what they came out of their mouth, they wouldn't have like 15 duck lip pictures. I mean, like, I'm serious. I know I'm kind of like, I know I'm pushing here. I know I'm really like pushing on you guys, mashallah. But you see what I'm saying? Like, you know, I'm kind of pushing the boundaries a bit here, but I'm being very real with you too. Because if a person didn't have that very conflicted sense of, let's say, beauty, it wouldn't be, you know, they wouldn't have gone through all those lengths, right, to make sure that they looked exactly in a certain way, right, for everybody else to believe that they looked beautiful too, you know. And no, I don't mean you should post what you look like immediately after you got out of bed. That's not what I mean. But what I do mean is, like, you know, you all know what I think I'm trying to say here, like the sheer number of hours and the sheer number of amount of time, and for those of you who don't post about yourself directly, it's also the sheer amount of time you spend on other people's posts where they have done that, like all the, you know, all the influencers, you know, who do spend all those hours and have a whole team of people making them look amazing, right? Or whatever their craft is, making that look amazing. So anyhow, mashallah, I really just want to point that out because it's a very real thing, and I see it in therapy all the time, right? And one more thing before I go out to this part of the conversation. If you ask me what are the main culprits, some of the very main culprits are actually all the social media. So that's why this conversation is important. And also why I'm going really heavy on the social media discussion, right? Now, as I said at the beginning, there are many reasons of why social media has been great. I mean, there's so many things. Look, if I'm just even talking about my own experience with posting about the topic of mental health in the Muslim community, it's been awesome. Like there's been, I see, because I see the DMs, I see the messages, like I see things, I don't see all my DMs, by the way, but I see just, we were like, why isn't she responding? There's a team of people, there's actually a whole team of people that are part of our social media. And what's amazing is you see people's attitudes shifting about mental health. You see people's attitudes, you know, literally, or their families' attitudes shifting. You see people who really need help and the stigma would have been so high to get the help and are now actually saying, yeah, okay, this is all right. I can do this. I should do this, right? That's great. Without a medium like social media, that message couldn't have gotten to those exact same people. Do you see what I'm saying? There are some really great things about being able to network and connect in that way. But then there's these other negative things that we're talking about, right? So I just want to keep balancing the conversation so it doesn't all sound like I'm a complete Debbie Downer, right? Like I just want to make sure that we're, well, what I said at the very first slide, that we're definitely people who are balanced in everything we do, because that's what Islam calls for. It calls for moderation, it calls for balance. So anyhow, let's go to this part where we talk about kind of how do we prevent, so we understand all the negative stuff, how do we prevent it from messing with our mental health? So three things, right? Creating boundaries. What does that mean? Work, sleep, eat, okay? And then there's time for engaging with social media. I don't know how many of you guys wake up and open up your eyes and immediately the first thing is you're kind of just scrolling through whatever is coming through your phone, right? And it's kind of normal because maybe you have your alarm clock set there too, or maybe you're trying to figure out what time it is, or maybe you're trying to get to your schedule of the day or whatever, just trying to figure out what's going on. And guess what? Everything else pops up on your phone too. So you kind of scroll on it too, right? So it happens. And this is where I'm saying it takes work. Like it actually takes discipline. Just like for any of you guys who are athletes, you know this. If you're going to actually be able to compete and play, you're going to have the discipline to get up when everyone else is asleep and to work out. You're going to have to have the discipline to eat better. You're going to have the discipline to go back out and exercise again when everybody is just like, you know, chilling and watching TV. Like if you're going to be the athlete, you're going to have that discipline, right? Islam, athlete or not, Islam gives all of us discipline, because if you pray 5 times a day, that's a discipline. I like to say, stop, drop, and pray. You need to stop, drop, and pray, literally. Like you need to figure that out in the middle of your work. I know we were all coming off of COVID and quarantine for so long, subhanAllah, and it's been a time where maybe prayer, I hope, was a little bit easier because everybody was essentially home mostly. But as we get back out into the world and back out into busy lives and getting to classes and getting to work and this and that and commuting and all the rest of the jazz, you know, keeping up with prayer times, especially in the winter, is hard work. It's discipline. It's legitimate discipline, you know, trying to do that. So inshallah, that's you creating boundaries. That's you saying, this is where I need to be able to make sure I drink this many cups of water a day, right? And this is where I need to make sure I work out this much a week. And this is where I need to make sure I'm healthy and sleeping this much. It's the same thing with social media. This is where I know I need to press that stop button and go, enough scrolling, right? And that's important, kind of creating boundaries. Then number 2 is being intentional. Islam is a religion of intention, right? Innal a'malu binniyat. I know all of you know this one, right? Is, you know, all of everything we do is by intention. Everything only counts by intention, right? Unless you have the intention, the prayer doesn't even count, right? So everything is by intention. So same thing here too. You can go on social media and connect and, you know, message a cousin you haven't talked to in forever, and you get like your wonderful hasanat points because you have, you know, kept up your silatul rahim, right? Your auntie or whoever, right? You can post some really great knowledge. You can learn some really great things, right? We all know the good things that can come of it, right? But we also now understand all the negatives too. So you ask yourself, what's the point of this? Oh, so-and-so messaged me yesterday and I just want to make sure that they're, you know, I responded, whatever. Okay, fine. Yeah, but that takes like this much time, not that much. Right? So be intentional. And lastly, to choose wisely. You have the power of choice. It's up to you. Figure out who to follow and who to stop following. It really, it's as simple as that. Because sometimes I say like, what's the point of following that friend who's always kind of getting at you? Like, is it just out of spite? Like you just want to know what they're doing? Even that influencer, I'm very serious. Like sometimes I'm like, what's the point of that person? You know, what's the point of that account? Oh, you know, and it's like, okay, but is anything positive? Is anything positive coming out of it? Like, do they sometimes post something that's actually like useful and life-changing for you? No, I just want to know what the latest drama is. It's like, that's not a good enough idea. Really not a good enough idea. Mashallah. So anyhow, you have the power of choice. You can choose who you follow and who you don't. And likewise, who follows you and who doesn't, right? I mean, that's you have choice there too, right? So figure out what's going to be positive for you, inshallah. So again, my message isn't like big bad social media off of it. Rather, it's more like, well, let's hone this properly, right? Because, you know, again, to the driving example, like I said, cars aren't going to go away. So what you need to do is learn how to drive properly and hone that. Same thing here. Although there's no driving test, there's no test for social media, right? Like proper usage. You can create that for yourself, right? What are the proper kind of guidelines that are helpful? Because ultimately it's not, and you don't need your parents to do this. Like this is not a, I'm being your mommy telling you yes, no, bad, good. Rather, it's you doing this for yourself, and you can be your best police. You don't need someone else to police you. You know what I'm saying? The reason for that is because you understand the connection between that, between social media and between mental health, right? So anyhow, that's kind of what I have in terms of our conversation. And I hope that's been a kind of a useful discussion. And now I think it'd be good to just sort of open up and have a conversation with together. And I've left here some of our info on the Stanford Muslim Mental Health Lab and Stanford Muslim Mental Health and Islamic Psychology Lab. We went through a recent name change. And so some of that information. And Maristan is the logo that you see behind me, and also the logo that is, or the new organization that inshallah is part of, is stemmed from the work in the lab, and it's our new nonprofit focusing on Muslim mental health and Islamic psychology, and a lot of really great content hopefully coming your way. So definitely make sure you follow those accounts. I'm asking you guys to follow good accounts, inshallah, that are helpful accounts in moderation. But anyhow, that way you have some, you know, references to where to find some more content that I've been talking about today, and other mental health content, inshallah, that might be useful too.
Thank you so much. This was an amazing talk. So yeah, we could open it up for Q&A or just a discussion. If anyone wants to say something, feel free. If it's personal, DM anyone, or if not, you can always contact Dr. Rania afterwards. So yeah, if anyone has any questions or would like to discuss anything, please do so.
I will also just maybe quickly recommend for the group that I think that this conversation might have the potential to be a bit serious or personal. And so I think it actually might be best to stop the recording and live streaming if that,
Mhm.
I don't
Yeah.
know, Dr. Rania, would you agree
Yeah,
with
let's
that?
do that. I think that'd be a great idea. And so for those who listen to the recording later or are on the live stream, thank you so much for attending. And I'll just kind of close up here with Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Thank you guys for attending. And now we'll kind of open it up to our folks that are here with us at the Zoom.